Hello and welcome into the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and today we're getting an update from Emerita Resources. Emerita is traded on the TSX.V under the ticker EMO and on the OTCQB under the ticker EMOTF. I'm joined today with the CEO and Chairman of Emerita Resources, David Gower. And David, great to get you back on the show for an update here. We got a couple of big news items to get through all in one discussion, but it's going to be fun to dive in. And I want to kick things off with the news that you put out to the marketplace. It seems like forever ago in mining terms, but it's really not that long ago. And that was April 30th. You put out an update on the resource at your IBW project. Now, this is the Iberian West Project in Spain, but you note on here a 35% increase in the total indicated resources and a 44% increase in the total inferred resources. So walk us through some of the key takeaways and metrics in this updated resource estimate that you put out at IBW.
Okay, thanks, Chad. Yeah, the IBW project continues to grow. We still have 4 drills operating there. So the resource now, combined indicated and inferred, is up just over 25 million tons at a zinc equivalent of about 8.5%. It's not really a copper deposit, but copper equivalent is just over 3% copper for people that are more comfortable with that. And interestingly, of course, it's quite a precious metal rich system. So there's about 1 million ounces of gold in that resource, and the drilling that we're continuing to do is expanding over those numbers, and about 50 million ounces of silver as well. So a very good outcome to date. It sits in the 3 deposits. Infanta is the eastern one, the highest grade. Cura is in the middle. It's the one that we're drilling. It's more of a copper gold system, a bit lower in lead zinc. And then Romanera is the larger one on the western side of the property, which has the bulk of the tonnage. And both Romanera and Cura are gold-rich systems, which is unusual for the belt. So very happy with the results to date. The deposits are all very shallow. They basically are from surface. We've drilled Romanera down to about 650 or 670 meters only. It's still open at depth. All deposits remain open at depth. Infanta, we're only counting down to about 120 meters depth, and on Cura, about 300 meters depth. So very importantly, relative to other deposits that are being mined in the camp, shallow, which has a massive advantage in terms of cost, both capital and operating. So for example, Boliden at Neves-Corvo is mining at 2 kilometers more or less, and Sandfire at Aguastinitas is about 1.5 kilometers deep. So it's a nice advantage to be at or near surface.
Well, and David, when we've talked before, you mentioned the importance of the third amigo here coming into the mix at Cura. You know, before you had La Infanta and Romanera on either side, Cura is in between the two, and you've got this one in the resource now, but maybe to speak to how the drills are still turning, as you say, 4 different drills, how you're still filling in the gaps here, not just at the depth component, like as you say, you can go down a lot deeper, but also just between these 3 deposits.
Yeah, well, we continue to expand, focus on Cura because we hadn't drilled it in our previous resource. And its location is very strategic in that we're planning to put the infrastructure on the east side of the property near Infanta. And so the ramp that we'll put in to access the Romanera will actually go right by Cura, which is about halfway across. So it has the potential to provide early feed while we're developing the big mine at La Romanera, and at very little cost, because the development for La Romanera is essentially going to put us right in proximity to that deposit. So it's a nice addition to the story, if you will, and anything you can do to advance cash flow and have it coming earlier, obviously will have an important impact on potential IRR of a project like this. So we have 3 drills on Cura. We have one that we've moved off of Cura. We have a number of targets in the Infanta area that have not been drilled. They're geological targets. That's the area where the infrastructure is going. So we want to drill in now and make sure that we don't inadvertently put the mill buildings or the tailings or other infrastructure on top of the deposit. So we'll test those now with one drill and make sure that when we do the final layouts, we don't sterilize any potential ore.
How much drilling do you think you will do? I mean, because at one point you had to do a cutoff to get this resource estimate updated, but how much drilling has happened since then, and how much drilling will you do before you do another resource update, or will that just tie into a future economic study when you release that information?
Yeah, we'll drill until basically we'll do the economic study, which will start next month. We're meeting this week to go through the bids actually for the pre-feasibility study. As we get closer to the end of that, we'll update the resource as part of that. And some of the drilling will be to continue to convert inferred resources to indicated. But we're in good shape. It's about between 75 and 80% indicated now. So that allows us to go straight to a pre-feas. We don't have to do a PEA because we really don't need to include the inferred resources at this stage. Some of the higher grade inferred resources we want to convert, of course, because they do help the business case. But it's probably maybe another 35 holes maximum between now and then the time that study is done.
Okay, we'll be on the lookout for that update when it comes out then, I guess just in front of the economic study. But important, yeah, to get those in the indicated category so you can put them in the PFS. Now, another thing that's important about this deposit, as you already have alluded to, is it's polymetallic. So while you reported zinc equivalent and copper equivalent, you still have a lot of other metals in there. You've got a lot of silver, you've got a lot of gold, you've also even got some lead in the mix there. So a lot of metals here, multiple concentrates that some of these metals will be reporting to. But I think it's important, the point you just made about the PEA too, is, a lot of times those are a marketing document that companies will use more so than really a great study. You have so much rich information on the metallurgical work in addition to the resource model that it makes sense to go to the PFS stage. And you put out some news to the market just on May 27th about the improved metal recoveries. And this is a big win for the gold and precious metals portion of the deposit. So maybe just speak to some of those studies you've done on the met work have continued to get better and better, but now really looking good for an 81.5% gold recovery.
Yeah, that's a very important point. This resource that we put out earlier this year is the first time that we actually had metallurgy. So the original resource that we did, uh, the metallurgy assumptions were benchmarked against existing and historical mines in the area. Because this is the only one that has this level of gold mineralization, there was no benchmark for that. So in the original resource that we put out in 2023, we only used 20% gold recoveries. In this resource, we have metallurgy up until December of last year that showed 64.5% gold recoveries. So the zinc equivalents and copper equivalents that I just stated to you actually only represent 64.5% gold recoveries. With the most recent work that we've done, we're now up to 81.5%. That will also have a significant impact, obviously, on the value per ton at no extra cost. And in fact, even at 64.5, the gold plus silver value is about the same as the zinc plus lead value. With going over 80% recoveries for gold, it's actually the precious metals will be worth more than the base metals in this deposit using kind of $2,200 gold price. So it's pretty interesting. Of course, gold is on a bit of a tear, and we expect that to continue for some time. So it really does benefit the value per ton in these deposits.
Well, even the metals price assumption you just mentioned there is quite a bit lower than where the spot gold price is today. And I know that's normal for the industry, David, but maybe just speak to at spot prices, what would that mean as far as the amount of metals that could be recovered now with higher gold prices? And should you even consider a gold equivalent resource?
Um, we are considering that, in fact. We're continuing with the metallurgy, so there'll be another round of work that's coming out. But yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but we actually have done internally a gold equivalent. And it's, I think, if I recall, it's around 4.5 grams, or maybe 4.5 to 5 grams per ton gold is what it comes out to.
Well, and so I guess the takeaway is whatever metal you'd end up reporting it in, you're still going to have a polymetallic deposit. And those are some of the most interesting and sometimes lucrative deposits on the planet because you have an internal diversification between all the different metals. Like if copper goes on a run, or God forbid, if zinc goes on a run, and you already have seen what happened with both silver and gold when they move up, how those affect the economics. You have all those metals going on, but remind us again in a PFS situation. I know you don't have the study out yet, but what's the general plan as far as how the different metals would report to what concentrates, and how many concentrates would you produce then?
The metallurgical work that we've done shows that we can produce three base metal concentrates, a copper, a lead, and a zinc concentrate, all of which are of good quality for commercial sale to multiple smelters. Um, Gold and silver, some of it will report to the copper and lead concentrates, about 20%. And then the rest of it will come out in a second process, which we've been testing. It involves a thermal process that'll break down the sulphides, and then this clever process that's been developed by Dundee Technologies out of Quebec. And that increases the base metal recoveries, but massively increases the gold recoveries. So we actually get up to 81.5% by adding that onto the metallurgical circuit.
So just kind of a final step there to capture some of the gold even after you do the first three concentrates. So, and we've talked a little bit about that in the past. So definitely a lot different look at the IBW deposit than maybe a year or two ago even. And you're now recovering so much more of the precious metals, but you've also got El Cura in the mix with the resource. And like you say, you can move some of those categories from inferred to indicated before the PFS, then those could play a big part of the economics of the project. Just from a high level on the economics of the project, I know that you have other projects that people are interested in. We will get to the Aznalcóllar soon, and I know you also are working on that Nueva Tintillo project. But just with IBW, maybe just speak to how it already underpins and then some, the market cap of the company, and just maybe the disconnect between where you're valued and where this project is valued.
Yeah, well, we see ourselves moving along a path similar, if you will, to what Adriatic and Foran are the two that we tend to look at, because they're companies that essentially, rather than trying to sell the asset, opted to develop the mines. So, if we look at where Foran is right now, they're in feasibility, they're underground developing a project. Their market cap's about 1.7 billion. Similarly, Adriatic is around 1.3. I think there's actually a bid for Adriatic, actually north of a billion, around that value right now. So we expect to get our environmental authorization published for public comment in the next couple of weeks. And so as we continue to de-risk the project, complete the feasibility, we should see our market cap move from where we are today, at a relatively low valuation, about 285 million, moving towards, where we see Adriatic and Foran as we get down the track towards development. So this project is one that should realize on its own, irrespective of what else is going on in the company, a significant capital gain for our shareholders.
Yeah, David, I just think that was important to highlight because I think people forget how valuable IBW actually is, and it's still a glaring mismatch as far as, in my opinion, where your market cap is versus what the project is worth. So maybe you close some of that gap. Definitely room for some re-rating. And I think it's also worth pointing out that the government considers this a project of significant importance. So maybe just speak to the permitting angle and the government support, and what else needs to happen on the permitting and regulation side to continue to move this project forward.
Yeah, so it has been designated by the Andalusia government as a project of strategic importance, which basically means that they've endorsed it as being essentially as important to them economically as it is obviously to our shareholders. And that puts it on a fast track for permitting. So they actually assign a team of senior bureaucrats to make sure that every aspect of the documentation that we file with the government is put basically at the top of the pile for the various departments to do their reviews. And they actually put time limits on those departments to get through the material, so things aren't sitting around. And it's worked very well. Their objective is to cut the time in half, basically. So that's why we've been able to achieve the situation where we should see the AAU, or environmental authorization, hopefully published this month for public comment. Following that 40-day period, any allegations or questions will be responded to by the government. And the allegations are both negative and positive, of course. There'd be groups that are not in favor of development generally, but there's also a lot of groups that are strongly in favor, particularly in business groups that can see, a massive opportunity for their businesses, and it will be a huge employer for this region, which is fairly high unemployment. So the fact that the government has designated that, or granted that designation, it's a signal to all other levels of government that essentially they want this to be built.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good signal indeed. And it's something that you see happening really in many countries where they're starting to designate some of these projects with the critical minerals and strategic minerals of significant importance, starting to fast track them and come up with a way to move them forward. I think the world realizes it needs to have a different supply chain than just relying on China. And so domestic supplies are prized, and doing their best to have a balance between the public comment and hearing all sides, but also moving these big projects forward that need to be in place to produce these metals that we need for the modern age. So just a lot going on with IBW, from the resource expansion to the metallurgical work, all of the things moving along with permitting, and obviously moving towards the PFS in the near future. So we'll keep tabs on that. Now, we don't really have time in this one to get into the Nueva Tintillo project, but it's an earlier stage exploration project, but very large and a lot of prospectivity. David, I'm sure there's people that have been waiting for this whole interview to get to the next part, which is on Aznalcóllar. Now, this is interesting because on June the 2nd, you put out a news release where you were commenting in response to the Minister of Energy and Mines on May 30th coming out, and the timing on this is a little bizarre, but he granted the exploitation license to Minera Los Frailes, and it seems strange to have that happen when you're in the middle of a legal proceeding, and your counsel has mentioned to you that this should not affect in any ways the outcome of the Aznalcóllar public tender, but yet this motion was filed anyways by the Minister of Energy and Mines. Maybe give us what you can say about the response and reassure people that this doesn't really have any bearing on the outcome of this tender.
Yeah, the criminal case is well advanced. It's, most of the testimony has already been heard. There are some expert witnesses yet to be called, and I think two of the people that are accused are still to be called right at the end. And what I would say is our counsel's assessment is essentially that trial is going exactly as we would expect. And in Spain, you really don't, under their legal system, you don't get to this point in the legal process unless there's essentially certainty of conviction. So what I would say is our assessment is that the defense arguments are not holding up very well at all in this case. So we do expect that people will be convicted of some form of corruption charges and or prevarication. And given there's 16 people involved, it's really almost impossible that somebody is not going to be tagged. The important thing, of course, with that is that if there's commission of a crime in awarding a public tender in Spain, that bid has to be disqualified by law. And we're the only other qualified bidder in this tender process from 10 years ago. The minister issued this resolution, as you mentioned, last Friday. Very odd timing, no fanfare. He was there with the mayor of the town, and nobody from Minera Los Frailes was at the very hurried small press conference, which took place at the end of the day Friday, and which also is probably by design. But the blowback on the government over this announcement in the media has been very, very strong and hugely critical. And in fact, there is a reporter who we haven't quite contacted yet who indicated in his reports he had been doing a broader investigative report on corruption within the Socialist Party broadly. And he allegedly has audio clips of senior government officials giving what they call their fixer or their plumber, this lady Lira Diaz instructions to basically run a campaign to discredit Emerita and, of course, myself and Joaquin, our president. So this is kind of dynamite type news. We were not aware of these recordings or anything until this report came out. But all of that just really highlights, I think, for the criminal case, it just punctuates the fact that, this group are trying to cover up a crime. So that's my interpretation. I don't want to second guess the courts, of course, but we do feel very confident that the courts are fair. We've had experience with them, even with the IBW project, and they will be, in their view, a just and fair verdict. And our counsel feel very, very confident that we're going to win this.
Well, I think we're all going to be still watching and waiting for the outcome of the legal proceedings. But just one more question as far as the news, you mentioned it became a bigger story. For people that are not in Spain, that are not following along with this maybe as closely, just give a sense of what kind of media coverage is there really on this case now, not just from that recent issue when the Minister of Energy and Mines issued the exploitation license, but also just in general, as far as the corruption charges in Spain. Is it a case where the general public is seeing this in a bigger way than maybe we would see it here in North America?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Senior government officials are being charged in a very public trial. So it's in all the major papers. It's in all the print media. It's in the television media. It's on the online media. So there's a lot of coverage. If people speak Spanish, they can find more information than they probably would ever want to see if they access the Spanish media sites.
I just thought I'd ask you that because I think it calls into question even more the idea that the timing was picked now to go ahead and award this exploitation license. So it's not something where nobody's really paying attention. If the whole country is watching this go down and then you pick now to issue the exploitation license, I'll go ahead and just speculate on my end that I think it's very strange timing. So at any rate, I think we'll all be watching for the outcome of those legal proceedings. Obviously, the importance of Aznalcóllar is a large project. Just remind people, just as we wrap up, David, why this project's of such importance, and if it was awarded to Emerita, what it would mean.
Well, it's a past producer. The Los Frailes deposit was only in production for about a year and a half, and it was a 73 million ton deposit. Within that, we certainly see more than 30 million tons of higher grade. That was the open pit reserve. But with today's metal prices, I would say we'll probably drop our cutoff lower than that, because that 30 million tons would be about 11% combined copper, lead, zinc, with about 3 ounces silver, which it means we'd be leaving quite a bit of ore behind at that cutoff. So the deposit is open at depth. It's only drilled to about 300 meters below the existing pit, and the higher grades and thicker ore is actually the deepest holes. So this thing can get very large quickly. There is another deposit, which was the original mine on the property, the Aznalcóllar mine. That was also a large open pit. It was a 90 million ton deposit, more or less. More than half of that deposit is remaining below the pit there as well. And these two deposits are close enough that you could access them from the same underground infrastructure. So you could hit a 9-iron from one pit to the next one. It's not far at all. So this project, once it's back into production, will likely run for more than 50 years, in my view, at a high production rate. We don't know what the ultimate size of this will be, but it's going to get a lot larger, it would appear. It's unlikely that a deposit that's 45 meters thick disappears on the next section. It just, deposits in this camp tend to go, as you see at Sandfire and at Neves Corvo in Portugal, well beyond a kilometer. So this is a very important and large scale deposit for any company in this sector. It would be material.
Yeah, those things go deep, and the odds are, like you say, Mother Nature doesn't just bring all that mineralization up there without having either more layers down at depth. So just the importance of the project, underscore that here as we wrap up. But we'll keep following along with the legal proceedings, and I know that you think that maybe by the third quarter of this year, that's when you'd have an outcome. Is that the way you're looking at it, David?
Yeah, I think the court is scheduled to wind up the first week of July. It may actually be a bit earlier than that, but they've allowed that much court time. Just a number of the testimonies have gone shorter as it goes on. So around the end of June, first week of July, it'll wrap up. In terms of testimony, I assume the three judges will deliberate for some period of time, but they've already been through 14,000 pages of previous appeals and the 3.5 years of police investigation and all the documentation. So I don't think it should take them a terrible long time to deliberate on this. The courts do shut down in August in Spain, and as does most of government. It's just so hot, people head to the coast. So my guess that it would be sometime after August, perhaps in September, we get the final verdicts. It would be rendered, but I don't have experience, and I haven't been able to pin anybody down on a date. But our counsel don't think it would be months. They think it would be weeks after the trial ends. If it runs into August, then of course it won't be till after August. But third quarter sounds about right.
Well, we'll hope for a speedy resolution, but also prepare people mentally that it may be something like September before you have the actual answer. So just to give people a rough timeline, gets rid of some of the anxiety that way, but also increases it because it's still going to be a little while before you have the answer. But just as we wrap up, David, final thoughts on how you encapsulate the entire Emerita Resources story right now for people looking at it. Obviously, you're in Spain. You've got polymetallic deposits. You've got a lot of exploration growth on tap, but is there anything else you'd say that kind of separates you from other companies in the sector?
Well, I think we've probably got the two, well, with IBW, if and when we get Aznalcóllar, we probably have the two premier projects in the belt, other than the operating mines. But they've been operating, Nevis, I think, has been operating for 50 years now. It's deep, and its best years are behind it. I think Aguastinides is certainly more than 20 years. Similarly, they're getting quite deep. So these are fabulous deposits near surface, long mine lives. Even IBW would be probably at least 20 years, if not more. I think the business climate in Europe, and particularly in southern Spain, has never been better for developing mines. The Andalusia government passed a resolution a couple of years ago identifying underground mining specifically as preferred economic activity for the region. Of course, the European Union has published mandates to have, I believe they're targeting 15% of their critical metals produced within the EU by 2030 and attempting to get between 35 and 50%, a decade or so later, which is a very tall order for the EU because there are really, other than really south of Spain, some mining in Ireland and Eastern Europe, there are not a lot of environments where you're going to be able to develop large deposits.
All right, well, we'll wrap it up there, but I think it's an interesting value proposition for the company. A lot of news flow still on tap for the balance of this year. Definitely keep us posted. We'll get you back on when you do some more updates to either the met work or to the exploration work. Maybe we'll do an even episode, David, where we dive in a little bit more to Nueva Tintillo and just give it a little more airtime. But I think there's a lot on the go with Emerita Resources. So for those listening in, definitely click on the link below in the show notes. It takes you over to the Emerita website, straight to their news section where you too can follow along or sign up for updates. And then when you get the next big key milestone out, David, let us know. We'll get you back on for an update.
Thank you very much, Ed. Appreciate it.